We are so excited to have this speaker series being brought forward today by the remarkable Professor Alan Sayegh, who comes to us straight from Boston, evading a blizzard, to be with us today to share his work and vision at a time when the intersection between the physical and the digital has become ever more seamless and ever more potent with possibility, problems, complexity, engagement, entanglements, and quite frankly, excitement. I will share with you a small personal story, which is that Alan was my professor, and he continues to be my teacher. He is one of the kindest, most brilliant, most thoughtful professors, friends, mentors that a person could ever have. And I am not the only one who thinks so. If you speak with anybody who's lucky enough to be within the circle of his care, the circle of his education and teaching, you will know that what I say is true. And because I think so often we forget how important kindness is when we are inventing something. It's often the difference between success and failure. Having warmth and kindness in the environments in which we innovate allows us to risk more deeply, to ideate more profoundly, and to give us that necessary energy to go that extra mile. Alan is that person. He is that person who creates those environments. And you are so dear to me and so many. Alan came to the United States in 1994, escaping a very difficult situation in Lebanon. He entered the Harvard GSD as an MDes student, just like me, but unlike me, developed an incredible, we won't use the number other than using the word 28-year career at the Harvard Graduate School of Design, and is one of the longest standing professors in that really remarkable ecosystem. He calls himself a faculty without discipline, somebody who is guided so much by inquiry and curiosity and finding out and collaboration. And I think that this has been not only one of his hallmarks, but also a secret sauce. Right? That as the world changes, as technology changes and our approach to our lives and our connection to technology shifts and flexes, Alan is always at the avant-garde, gently propelling us forward with curiosity, with compassion, and with a sense of collegiality that has built a community of practice that extends not just across the Harvard campus, but to MIT, to so many universities across the country and around the world. And it is with such great pleasure that we bring you to our Design Nexus stage. Thank you so much, Alan. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna, for that amazing introduction. And thank you for inviting me. I'm honored to be here. Maybe I'll start where Anna left off. Basically, I came to Cambridge early 90s, and I was trained as an architect. And at that time, there was a lot of excitement. I hope still there is about technology and how navigation, how interaction is happening with technologies, and I had a lot of interactions with also with MIT Media Lab professors back then. So a lot of metaphors were coming from architecture in terms of how navigation happens, and because everything was happening back then with a very exciting new ways, basically. So I started my career as an architect, then I went into video game design, and then interaction design, and I've always been in between these worlds. So I don't call myself an architect. I'm not definitely not an HCI expert. I'm not a psychologist, but I play within these, I'm a designer that I play within these three realms. So I titled my talk, Interpretive Wandering, the Serious Work of Play in a Generative Age. So, anytime we're having meetings now at Harvard or anywhere, there's this huge anxiety about AI. There is hope, and there's more anxiety about AI is going to take over everything. What are we doing? How can we deal with it? So I have a way of understanding this, and I have a way of thinking about it, and that's what I'm going to share. So before that, just to give you a little bit of what I do. I have my studio, which is called INVIVIA, right outside of Harvard Square. I work with different types of clients, and we do some experimental work, some art, public art, but also design, a lot of design-focused work. So it's a very collaborative type place, and it's right next to Harvard, where I teach. And this is the Graduate School of Design, where I teach. It's those are the trays. And GSD, which is the Graduate School of Design, is a place, it's one of the largest, I think it's the largest design school in the country, but over there design is in these, it's a built environment, the design of the building. So there's architecture, landscape architecture, and urban design and planning. And what I do there is I head the MDes mediums, which is, initially, it used to be called MDes Technology, and now it's called Mediums, and it's less architectural technology, it's more technology, art, and design. So that's what the MDes program is, which I think is kind of similar to the program here, but I think it's much larger there, and somehow it keeps growing. So some of the things that I've done in the last 10 to 15 years, I've worked a lot with some interaction design, and I wanted to show this because I've done some product work. There are some patents that I've been on in interaction. For example, flipping through windows on your phone. My name is on that patent. So but I'm not an HCI person. But I've worked on these types of projects, and these were through Microsoft. I was doing consulting for Microsoft back then. But I also developed inclusive design guide for Microsoft. Which became quite important in terms of its impact and its influence. Basically, is how the idea behind it was designers. When they design, they think about people around their capability, and basically how you can expand that bell curve. And usually designers are much more capable on an average than any from the general public. And if the general public of the abilities of the general public is a bell curve, the designer stays in that slightly to the right of the top of the bell curve. So how you can expand that. So we came up with these different techniques, and it's almost a manifesto basically of how what inclusive design means in the idea of technology. Right now, I have a lab at Harvard, and besides my practice where we do more responsive environments work, is bringing, again, technology to the built environment. So it's somewhere between technology, psychology, and the built environment. We do publications. This is one of the recent publications we've done. Those are some of the, this is something on mobility and the urban environment. We do even work that is much more technical. This is about flying and really understanding human behavior in the airports, for example. So it's really quantitative way of capturing human experience. So there are these different buckets of work that I do. They all relate with the idea of either understanding or bringing technology to the built environment and human experience. But today I'm going to talk a little bit different, with a little variation on what I do. So as I said, my talk is Interpretive Wandering, the serious work of play in a generative age. So, in a moment defined by artificial intelligence and generative systems, design is increasingly framed as production. Faster outputs, more variations, optimized solutions. Value has always tended to be measured in velocity and volume, and now, even more so, how quickly we can generate, how efficiently we can converge. Within that logic, anything that doesn't look like forward progress can read as indulgent. Play, especially, is often treated as detour, a waste of time, a luxury, a soft activity we're supposed to outgrow once the real work begins. So that's how play is perceived. But in a generative age, that assumption breaks down. When machines can produce endlessly within existing frames, the scarce and consequential work is deciding what those frames should be. The core labor of design becomes interpretive, recognizing what actually we're looking at, what's being assumed, who is being centered, and what is quietly excluded. That interpretive work takes time before the answer that can look inefficient from outside, but is often where the stakes come into focus and the problem itself changes. This is where play returns as a serious practice, not as whimsy, but as a disciplined suspension of premature judgment. Play builds temporary worlds with provisional rules. It allows us to try an alternative logics, hold contradictions without resolving them too early, and notice possibilities that optimization would disregard. In other words, play doesn't weaken rigor, it protects rigor from collapsing too quickly into the familiar. And this is the most important part. Rigor can collapse too quickly into the familiar. I want to reframe play and interpretive wandering in terms of what they do for design. I could argue that they do many things, but I would like to talk about three benefits that matter precisely because AI can generate so much. First, they enable reframing. They help us see differently so we don't simply solve the wrong problem faster. Second, they create publicness. They move interpretation into lived contexts where meaning is negotiated with others, not authored alone. And third, they cultivate responsibility. They strengthen judgment, helping us choose what deserves form and which futures are worth rehearsing. Because the question in the age of AI is not whether we can generate more, it's whether we can expand what's considered possible and decide with care what's worth making. So, before I go further, I want to pause on the title and be precise about how I'm using these terms. By interpretive, I mean the work of making sense before making solutions reading a situation, noticing assumptions, deciding what matters, and reframing what the problem even is. By wandering, I don't mean aimlessness. I mean deliberate practice crossing disciplines, contexts, and mode of making in order to widen the perception and allow new frames to emerge. And by play, I'm not talking about whimsy for its own sake, but the disciplined suspensions of premature judgment. Play, as I'm using it here, isn't a break from interpretation. It's interpretation made tangible. Constructing temporary worlds through provisional rules, speculative constraints, mock rituals, and prototypes that behave less like answers and more like questions. In that suspended space, we can notice what our habitual frames keep invisible. What we assume is fixed, what we treat as normal, and what we prematurely optimize, and we quietly rule out. Play gives designers a permission structure to linger with ambiguity long enough for meaning to shift, to test interpretations rather than only test solutions, to test surprise and contradictions becomes data, and to generate possibilities that don't yet have clear metric, client, or category. And finally, when I say generative age, I'm naming a condition where machines can produce endless variations inside existing frames, making interpretation, judgment, and responsibility the central human work of design. So, of course, play is not a new idea in design. Many designers in the last century did this, and Bruna Munari, an artist and a designer whose work treated play as a serious mode of inquiry across objects, books, workshops, and kinetic machines. He uses humor and simplicity to invite participation and sharpen perception, training people to notice relationships, materials, movements, and meaning rather than pushing it towards utility. For Munari, the point wasn't to generate more things, but to build tools for seeing differently, making his practice a lasting reference for design as interpretation. Munari is helpful here because he shows almost mischievously that play can be design method with real stakes. His whimsical machines, tactile experiments, and book objects don't aim to be useful in the visual way. They aim to change what you notice. The joke lowers your guard, and suddenly you attend to movement, texture, sequence, and relation, seeing the frame, not just the object. That shifts, matters, now becomes, it clarifies what play and wandering buys us. They enable reframing before we optimize, they make meaning testable through participation, and they train judgment about what deserves form. In that sense, Munari isn't a detour in the story, he's an early proof that a playful gesture can be a serious tool for expanding possibility. So in his Machines of Munari, he has this children's book, which is one of my favorite books. He has these machines, and this one is, it's called the Humiliator for Mosquitoes. So he draws the machine, how the machine works. He has the number one, and he has very precise instructions of how this machine works. So you starve the mosquito, and then you cut the balloon opens up, and then it's attracted to this picture of an ant. But the picture is drawn on a thin vellum, so the mosquito gets disoriented and then falls on this couch, and then there's this fan, pushes the mosquito, and then at the end, the mosquito is completely disoriented and is taken out by a stretcher. So this, of course, this is completely whimsical, but also what's really nice, like he talks about each step in a very serious way. So he talks about even like where you can get this fan from which town in Italy, which manufacturer you can get this fan from. And then he puts a note there. He says, I've told you 1,000 times that you cannot buy couches for mosquitoes. If you need one, I can make one for you. So it's this completely absurd machine, and he has so many of these. They're beautifully drawn and very precisely instructed. So I think this is some wonderful way of really stretching the imagination of bringing play and the tension between play and seriousness and where design lies. I think that's what I would like to think about with you and to have a discussion about at the end. So in the summer of 2025, last year, there were a lot of unrest happening on campuses for different reasons. And so we were in Cambridge, and we decided, let's do a project together with a couple of friends and colleagues. So I have a professor of physics, a landscape architect professor, a science historian, a medical doctor, geologist, architect, and a philosopher. And like here, those are colleagues basically that you can find because it's a university town, so it's easy to bring together kind of friends who are. So we said, let's work on a project together. We didn't know what the project was. We said, at that time, I had just finished a book by Umberto Eco. It's one of his short stories. He has a book called Misreadings. And one of the short stories is, it's year 2025, 2500 is in the future, and a bunch of archaeologists find a detergent bottle, and they go into these big conversations and really understanding what this, and they come up with all sorts of theories of what this bottle is. It's a detergent bottle. He talks about a Tide. So it's basically this Tide bottle that they found, and they come up with all these theories. So. And it's in the Misreadings, and of course he writes about it very, very beautifully. We said, why don't we do something like that? We're so full of anxiety now in what's happening in Cambridge. Let's think about Cambridge 100 years from now. Let's do this idea of future archaeology. And all of us can collaborate and work together. And let's spend 3 months on this. So. Of course, it was easier. We got very excited. It's very easy to say, okay, let's collaborate on a project like this. I have a very dear physics professor of physics who we thought the same way, and they were completely off. Like she was talking, what are you talking about? Are you hallucinating? We cannot do this. Physics doesn't work like this. And the same thing with the geologist. Everybody is coming. So at the end, we really worked on this so much. So these are some, we spent, and then there were designers building these machines, how the machines are going to be in the future, that are going to detect what Cambridge is like. So basically we're trying to look at Cambridge from 100 years in the future to our studio, basically, how we were working. So they did even these tests of these machines that smelled. So basically, these AI machines had synesthesia. They were smelling something with sensors, but reading, but seeing. So all sorts of. From one perspective, it looked like a hallucination, but from other perspective, it could look like these poetic machines. This is an eye that sees and reflects what you're seeing. So all these prototypes, and then the architect was building, designing the shed that was full of curiosities. The science historian wrote this whole essay about how the future might be interpreted through AI. We also went to the library that they had these tools, and we tried to decipher what they were, and we really put ourselves in that situation of really understanding what this instrument was. We never found out what I don't know if anybody, we still don't know what this does. It was this instrument that has weights. So we really tried to see how to look at ourselves from the future with that very naive eye. But the interesting thing, so it became a story that we started developing, and we started thinking about. So each interaction helped framing the story. We never had a problem to solve. So we made the problem, but the problem shifted, and everybody started working on something particular. And this is another image from the landscape architect. They went into detail about how they represent things, and this is the designer working on the eye, how the eye sees this machine had these different appendages. And we had artists. So even we took it outside. We started thinking about it, like how this would look in Cambridge, how this machine would come and discover what Cambridge is, or how Cambridge was 100 years ago. So here it's in Harvard Yard, like different places in Harvard Square. And then we did an exhibit of this. But what we did, the exhibit wasn't about coming up with anything. At the end, we didn't do anything. So that was it. We just collaborated. What happened was very interesting. It was very difficult to collaborate because it didn't go anywhere. That was one of the lessons learned, because these disciplines are very clear. Everybody, like the physicist, knows how to do something. The geologist, she's a scientist. She knows how to work on things. But what was nice about it, we agreed to never get to a point where the rigor of the discipline will interrupt the process. So that was very important to be able to continue so that was a very interesting way to play with these ideas, and at the end it was very interesting method. Now we have a paper on the method of how you can collaborate, so that's what we published at the end, but that wasn't the goal. It was completely the outcome of the process that we came up with. But everything worked in a certain way. But what was it at the end? It was just about this messy collaboration that play and being playful helped us continue work on it. But design is very much about that, if you think about it. Design is always in the middle of these disciplines, and you need to be able to borrow and suspend, almost suspend the disciplinary methods in a way where you can just go forward. So I'm going to show a little more other types of projects that will help frame this idea even better. So these are some of the shots from this is an exhibition at Harvard that yeah, and they went, everybody produced these amazing artifacts, and that's, again, you can say, what's the value of this? It did not really have like a tangible value. So basically, play is a method for protecting rigor from collapsing too quickly into the familiar. That's what I wanted to highlight with this. So the other type of projects that I'm going to talk about is the idea of publicness. And this, basically, the benefit of public play and wandering turns design into something that can be interpreted with others. So that's how you can think about it in the public situation. So as I mentioned, my area is between architecture, cognitive science, and technology. And I've been doing projects in this realm for quite some time. And some of it are installations like this, where bring some of urban or architectural ambiances or interpretations into the built environment. So it can go from very technical to some poetic. So this is a project in Harvard Square. This is a public installation in Calgary. It's called Familiar Strangers. This idea of, which I will talk more about, this idea of how to create public interaction, how to use media to create public interaction. Some of them are more permanent, some of them are more temporary. This is in front of Harvard Square. This is a bench, a sculptural bench that senses the environment and gives you feedback through vibrations, and where you can feel the environmental signals through your body. Basically, you can lie on it. This is an augmented reality project for Venice Biennale. So it always has to do something with the built environment and physicality. This is Pulses again. This is in New York. So we took it to different places. And every place people worked on it, interacted with it in a very different way. This is a project in Copenhagen that I'm going to expand on a little bit. Harvard Square. So all of these has some physical form that have some. The idea is, and finally, this is Mimi in Minneapolis, and this is a emotive cloud, a cloud that senses the environment and reacts accordingly. So these can fall under public art, placemaking, or experiments in the public. So the first one, just quickly to talk about this. This is the Familiar Strangers. So it was an underpass like this in Calgary. The town wanted to revitalize it. So the idea that we brought. People were walking through that underpass all the time. They see each other, they know each other, maybe they recognize each other, but they don't quite know them. So this idea of familiar strangers is this people that you see all the time, but you don't really know. I mean, you know that they're going into Starbucks at this time, you see them at Starbucks, you see them. So they're familiar, but they're strangers. So that's the concept that we borrowed. And the only thing that we did is to bring how the silhouette of each individual in a reversed way. So basically, as this individual is walking, they see their silhouette, like these are sight lines, approaching from the other side. So I'm walking on this side, my silhouette approaches. So in the middle, I see myself. So I see the rhythm of myself, basically. So the idea was just to create like how your motion or your rhythm is perceived by somebody else, because this idea of reverse mirror also. So, and this became a big installation. This was kind of permanent, but this is coming to a 8-year, or I think now it needs to be reset. And but just having something simple like this takes years to develop in a place like this. So it's a real construction project that you need to deal with many stakeholders. And so this is here. So this is how it. So the goal was, again, to create a place of conversation and so these this is during construction, so it has some glitches there, but yeah, so this is how it came. So of course, this is a very simple thing to do now. It's just it's a camera detecting motion and translating that into video. So all the technologies behind these are very simple. So this was, again, 2000, this is about 7-8 years ago. So the second project, this is Mimi in Minneapolis. So this was long before Minneapolis was so much in the news, is like how to capture the mood of Minneapolis. So that was it. So basically this cloud just captured the did sentiment analysis from social media and then just changed color. But what became interesting is this, people went under it and they started dancing with it and trying to calm it down. So you put something very simple in a public space and people react to it in very different ways. So again, the technologies are very simple in this. They're not complicated. It's just how you situate it and how you tell the story becomes the most important thing. So I'm not, one last project that see, these are projects from Pulses in different locations. And finally, this one, this was in Copenhagen, the Dream. What's interesting about this, this was a sculpture about empathy, like how to gather, to reflect empathy in a public space and reflect that. So this was coinciding with the centennial of the Armenian genocide. So it was commissioned by the Copenhagen municipality and the Armenian ambassador. But what's interesting, I guess I would say, it became completely highly, when you put something like this in a, although it's a public project, art project about empathy, it became a highly politicized. And then, so this was, when I landed there a week before opening, this was on the papers. It says Turkey, the country Turkey is very upset with this because of the genocide recognition. And so, but what this did, what was very interesting, it created a public debate, and there was a debate about recognition of genocide in the parliament, in the Danish parliament, because of this sculpture. So you start with a project that's just very simple, but when you put it in a public space, how things get interacted with, it becomes very, you don't know where it can go. So these are the types of projects that I've been doing, I've been thinking about. They fall between art and interaction and placemaking. So it's not, I never called myself a public art or an artist. So it's all these experiments, basically. And of course, this publicness is not simply provided, it's performed through play. So, and finally, I'm going to show some of the work of the students about what I'm calling it responsibility. So the third benefit is responsibility, wandering and play, strengthen judgment by making space to examine consequences before solutions harden into infrastructure. This is where play stops being a tactic or novelty and become a method for accountability. Testing, not just what works, but what matters. So in my teaching with the MDes students, critical and theoretical inquiry is inseparable from lab-based experiments and advanced fabrications. So form becomes an argument in public, projective, and what it proposes, and mnemonic in what it remembers, and social in what it invites or excludes. So the studios become a place to prototype, criteria, care, dignity, legitimacy, power alongside materials and technologies. And that shift, play held with rigor, becomes a permission structure for designers to choose deliberately which futures they are rehearsing and which once they refuse. So this idea of permission structure is very important. So that's when you have again, when I started this talk, I said people feel guilty when they're thinking about play, but you need permission structures for that. So if you start talking about that, like it's fine to play and experiment, I think that's what designers need. So this is and I'm not talking anything against disciplines. It's a way to basically to think about disciplines have very clear way of really thinking about their ways of doing and very proven. But this idea of having another permission structure to collaborate, I think makes a big impact. So this is one of the projects that studios that I did 2 years ago. This was the capstone projects of each student, but the idea was to think of a house. So this is Piper Auditorium. It's an auditorium like this. And we created this plan of a house, and everybody took their own space, and they thought about it in a very poetic way. We read phenomenologists like Bachelard and others. So really thinking about the poetics of each space using technology. And it was really about thinking about it in a very playful way. And in this sense, a bit more even theatrical. This is during the final review. This is another studio, this one that I did last year, and this is a short video of it. So in conclusion, let's see this. Yeah. If the generative age is showing us one thing, is that production is no longer the bottleneck. You can produce unbelievably fast and so many variations. And optimization is everywhere. What's scarce is the capability to decide what any of it is for, to notice what's being assumed, who is being centered, and what's quietly left off. That's why I organized this in 3 ways, basically reframing, publicness, and responsibility attaching to the teaching and how students are experimenting with learning. Reframing keeps us from solving the wrong problems fast. It expands the field of possibility before we converge. Publicness tests meaning in lived conditions where context and participation reshape what the work actually is. Responsibility strengthens judgment, turning making into a way to examine consequences and choose what deserves, and rather than letting default metrics decide for us. So the call is simple. When machines can generate endlessly, designers shouldn't compete on output. Our advantage is interpretive capacity, our ability to reframe, to make meaning with others in the world, and to take responsibility from what our forms invite or exclude. Practiced deliberately with play as a method, interpretive wandering is not a detour from making, it is how we should make differently and how we should choose futures worth living in. Thank you.
Thank you so much. What we're going to do is just do a little bit of Q&A and then throw it over to the audience to ask questions. And I'm happy, maybe Ellen,
yeah.
to come over and have a seat in the hot seat as our invited guest. And I'll warm us up with a question, but start thinking of your questions, because really this is a time for us to, oopsie, we should probably turn these things on. This is a time for us to engage you in conversation. So thank you so much for giving us an overview of that really beautiful and inspiring work.
Thank you.
And to inviting us to play. And it's so wonderful in this time that is so heavy, that you are bringing us into an awareness of how powerful play is. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit. I'm sure that you've been thinking a lot about Minneapolis and what's happening there, and your project Mimi, and what you would do for that community, how you think about that community right now vis-a-vis design and technology and engagement.
Yeah, I think, I mean, it's very, of course, it's very unfortunate what's happening. And I always think about Mimi when the news comes out about Minneapolis. Of course, at that time, Minneapolis was this, I mean, people were saying, why are you doing anything in Minneapolis? It's like the mood of Minneapolis. This is exactly, basically, the project was capturing the mood of Minneapolis and seeing that reflect, bringing it, embodying, basically, the mood of Minneapolis. So I think that's something that's important to do project like this, where it brings out what's happening in a poetic way, in a playful way, without being too much confrontational in any way. So it was a very, again, this was a cloud that was almost looked like a toy, big toy that just changed colors. But if we had this cloud now, it would have been very agitated, right? I mean, so it was just capturing the whole place, basically, in a poetic way. So I mean, what you can do with the I mean, it's very difficult. So right now I'm doing another studio. It's about this idea of surveillance, digital panopticon. Excuse me. And that's very timely also, like how our privacies are getting taken over by technology, and so all this relates. But I think the important thing is not, I mean, for me, there are people who do amazing work in different ways, but the way I approach it is, again, in a very playful way, just to bring up some social, some psychological issues, basically, that matter. So I think I encourage all the students to think that way, basically, to really think about projects that not necessarily, I mean, find you the best job right away, because you will, I mean, if you looked at my trajectory, I did so many things. I optimized the moment. I did whatever was interesting for me, but it just, as long as you can tell stories, you can do the thing that's passionate, that keeps you going forward. I think design is all about that. So I think you can do very interesting things. And coming back to your question about Minneapolis, is a very difficult thing to answer. But I feel like we need to do projects like this just to bring up what we can do, what design can do, basically.
I love that. Thank you so much. And I'm going to channel Derek Ham, who's our director of the ETC. And he was with us the other day, and he referenced a book that I'm sure you know by Roger Caillois, which was published in 1961, Man, Play, and Games. Mm-hmm. Do you know it? Yeah. So he talks about agon, which is competition, alia, which is chance, mimicry, which is role-playing, and then he talks about ilix as the fourth category of play. And I love ilix. Ilix comes from the Greek word whirlpool, and it means voluptuous panic, right? So the feeling that you get when you're a kid and you're swirling around in circles and circles and circles, and you just collapse within it. And I loved how you were centering play as a sort of antidote to the tyranny of rigor, which I think, especially in architecture, is really rough. But also, as you're talking about, we're also worried about our jobs and our careers, that we miss the voluptuous panic that comes from design, that is the joy of design. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about that and your students.
That's so important, this idea of joy of design. I mean, I have so much to say about that, especially with when I see a lot of generative work being done, because designers go into design. We all went into design because we're passionate about it, right? I mean, people go into design. And if you start delegating work to a machine, that becomes, that joy that you get is completely delegated. The joy is delegated, which is really, I don't understand it. I'm not saying AI is not the right thing, but the use of AI, how we use AI, is very important. And this idea of the idea of again having fun and having and spending time with something that makes you in a very rigorous way and in a playful way is very important. When children play, it's a very. I had a very good friend. She was a developmental psychologist. She used to say, play is serious work for children. It needs to be for us. We need to have serious play in work. So that's how I see that. I think it's very, very important to bring this idea of play into work and into how we think, because it opens up in very different ways, basically, the way we understand the world and we reframe the world.
I love this. I want to create out of the School of Design a play machine. That would be so good. Okay, I know that there are questions out here in the audience and all the way in the back, and I'm going to give this mic. I want to do it. Can you guys hand it back? Yes, you can. It gets, it's easier to be picked up in the record.
Perfect. Thank you. This was wonderful. So one of the things you mentioned about generative AI was that production is not the bottleneck anymore. But in addition, one of the things that's also very kind of impactful about generative AI is that it's like hyper specialized or hyper individualized. So of course, we get targeted ads, and our algorithmic feeds are personally tuned to what our preferences and what our interactions are. So do you think like play, especially in its public dimensions that you mentioned, is a kind of antidote to this kind of hyper-individualized kind of bubble nature that might be created by generative AI as well? I ask this question because I come from, my background's in philosophy. I do philosophy of science. So one of the kind of key things there in philosophy of art has been this Walter Benjamin stuff from the around 100 years ago about when he's talking about photography, how the creation and the mass kind of media photography changes the purpose of art. So so I wanted to ask about whether play, and especially in its public dimension, can be a kind of solution to or like an antidote to this hyper-focused individualization that might come from generative AI.
So let me understand. So the question is how you can hyper-focus? I think that part I didn't quite get.
how you can hyper-focus, but how generative AI leads to a kind of hyper individualization of your feed, or like everything's particularly directed to me as an individual, and whether play, especially in its public dimension that you talked about, can kind of get people together or like get people out of their hyper individual stuff.
I think, I guess what I was trying to make a point is like, generative AI is very good in really doing, again, focusing, and within certain frames, basically, it's very good at optimizing and creating these. But defining the problem, defining these frames are a human task. And that's what I'm saying with play. You can start breaking the frames of I'm not saying generative AI is a great tool, I think, but everybody has an anxiety now about the reason. I don't want to say I'm here anti-AI or anything like that. It's just where the right place for the human to intervene in design is, particularly in design I'm talking, and how you can break the frames of the focus, basically, to be able to focus on these different problems. That's the idea that I'm bringing forth. I'm not sure if I answered your question, but it's the idea of having these very focused. I think that's great. The only thing it becomes, I see with students also, when it gets confused with generating your personal ideas, basically, because it becomes this. It has AI has this illusion of completeness. Basically, it's very clear. Basically, you can quickly see something is complete, and we believe it if we haven't done it. So one of the issues, and we're having these discussions all the time. In every school is having it. Design schools are having it, and so if you haven't done something, how can you judge it? Basically, right? So I think that's a very complicated thing. Maybe it's not important to judge, but I mean, this is a long discussion. But I think defining what problems need to be solved, I think play can help with that, because you can suspend judgment very quickly. You can just push it in different directions. I think that's what I meant with that. Yeah.
Another question? I was wondering how you typically factor play back in, or kind of remind yourself of the importance of play, and go back to that when perfectionism or self-doubt or those things start to take over. What are things that you do?
So how I remember that I need to do this rather than is that?
Yeah, remembering to kind of play with it and take it less seriously when it gets to that point where perfectionism or doubt or
right. I don't know. Maybe you can argue I'm not a perfectionist. Maybe that's a problem. So I don't know. It's just I think you can train yourself to become playful and play basically with these objects. I mean, there are a lot of pressures, right? I mean, you all have. I mean, you need to. You can market yourself now. You're graduating. You say, okay, I need to find a job. If I say I'm playing, they might not take you seriously because people don't take play seriously. But what I'm saying is it needs to be taken seriously because it's another method basically to break down barriers. I think that's what it is. It is a method in design, but there are different techniques that I use, to remind myself that I need to. You have to. I mean, this idea of being mindful about something, which comes, it's very much like play. You need to, because we go into this automatic mode, it's very difficult, right? I mean, if you're, as you're saying there are all these, you need to remind yourself. But so if you're constantly questioning what things are in a more, pushing the boundaries without being very serious, I think, about it. But at the same time, knowing what matters, I think that's what how you can be playful, basically.
Hello. Okay, there we go. I was really interested when I was looking up your studio's work about the dream sculpture you guys did in Copenhagen for the Armenian genocide. And if you could you just like elaborate more on what inspired the form of the actual sculpture? And it almost looks like some sort of open-ended weaving. So
which sculpture you mean?
The dream sculpture that in Copenhagen?
So that, yeah, that was a complicated, so it had a lot to do with, the approach was very, almost like a urban, because Kulturvet, that square, has approaches from very different streets. So we wanted something that can be seen from each street. So it was very responding to the constraints of the site. So that there was one. Also, it was supposed to change colors according to. So this came right after Mimi. So we were doing, instead of getting the sentiment of the place, we were trying to get empathy messages basically from all over the world. People sending good wishes basically, and then it would light up basically each one of those poles. But the project got, as I mentioned, it got cut short basically because of all the debate that it created. But it created an interesting result. But the shape was very much. It wasn't a. We just wanted it to be very simple, to be seen from all the places, and then. Engineering constraints, the wind, and all that. So it created that shape. Basically, it wasn't a very, including budget constraints, right? I mean, we had to do it with certain timber, and so all that becomes very architectural on one level. So you deal with it in a very. Like we had to deal with a structural engineer and all that, but at the end, it's this experiment in the public space.
Thank you so much for your presentation. When you talked about Bruno Munari and how his games help people to see differently, I wonder if you have any suggestions for how play might help us see AI differently?
Yeah, so I think I think everybody should read Munari. That's my first. I think he's my favorite designer. I think I don't know if you said beat AI, like.
Or how play could help us see AI differently.
Yeah, I think that's definitely. I'm asking for that basically to see. I don't have a clear answer, but we need to be, because AI is also changing so rapidly, right? So I'm not like, my area is in technology, so I need to be very excited about AI, and I am in certain points, but also I see the issues with it. That it's mostly for me actually. What I meant is like it makes it. On one level, great for production, but there's something that's sad about it. That's what I found for designers, right? I mean, because it's like it takes out, and we touched about this. Like it takes away the joy of making that part, unless that's substituted with something else, which I don't know yet what it is. Like what aspect of AI that can substitute? So maybe we should talk more about this. I don't know. If you have an answer for that, I'll be happy to. I don't know.
Maybe the question we can think about is what games can we play with AI, or
Right, right. Yeah, so I think that's something that would be a great studio, for example, to get inspired by Munari's machines and doing something with AI, right? I mean, just rethinking, for example, how something is about optimization and how you break that, how just what AI does and just putting it there basically and seeing anew basically, right? I think that's very important, I think, because that will help you really think about what AI is doing and help you almost contain it, right, in an interesting way, rather than this tool that's pretending to know everything that is taking over. So I think that's the issue there.
Thank you.
Right.
Thanks for your talk. I have young sons, and when I was watching the images of the collaboration over the summer with your colleagues and neighbors, I was thinking about this idea of parallel play. And one of the things that emerges when you're watching your kids play is that if they're not playing with others, or they're not playing socially, let's say. And I was wondering in your collaboration if there was a moment where you realized that you were all working on your own projects and that there wasn't actually one project that was coming together or emerging from the play. And one of the things I was thinking of is that, you know, in the end of the day, you're neighbors. And so the contact zone is the city which you're working on, which I appreciated. But was there a moment where you realized that you were all parallel playing and that the play wasn't necessarily social play or as social as it might have been?
It was, so parallel playing meaning each one was doing something.
Doing their own thing, yeah.
So it was both. So people would do their own thing and then come back together and then clash a little bit and then change the prompt, change what we're doing. So it was a little bit of both. But I think it was, as I mentioned, it was very nice because it was never about reaching a solution. So that was frustrating, right? I mean, because everybody wants, like when you start something, you want to finish it. It's just how the only deadline that we had was we wanted to do this exhibit, and we did it when the time came. But we never finished what we were doing, and we don't even, and everybody's stopped playing at that time, basically. So that's what happened. So I think it was together, but at the same time, people would go in on their own, and then the discipline would take very much over, basically, right? So like how people are used to doing things, their methods, basically, just completely takes over, and then they come back, and then it just breaks it apart, basically. So that's how the process was.
Thanks.
Hi, I just have a fairly practical question. At what point throughout your design process do you get to play? Because, well, I guess you're in a different position than me because you're doing your own thing. But I don't find a lot of room throughout my projects to get to play. And when I do, I don't know when to stop.
When to stop?
Yeah, not even like out of practicality, I have to end up with the final thing, right?
So
my question is, where is your transition from play to getting something done?
I think that's a good question. But first, I have what type of work do you do?
I'm in the environments track here as an undergrad. So right now we're doing like smart home stuff, which is exciting.
I see. Okay.
Yeah.
So my take, designers play, whether they want to admit or not. Design is about play, right? So, and every discipline in design has its way to, we call it methods, basically, how we ideate, how we converge, diverge. So you do all that. I guess what I'm saying is you need to be comfortable. Like you should not feel guilty that you're playing. You should play as long as you can. And that project that I showed is an extreme case. It was just we were making a point that we're just going to continue and until there's no end to it. Basically, we just want to keep producing and do things. And but I mean, where to stop playing is basically, unfortunately, becomes deadlines, budgets, and all these. Not so fun things, but they're important as part of the design process. But I think within that structure, you should, I mean, the more you do this, you create these frameworks for you to be able to play. But that's important to expand it as much as possible. I guess that's what I'm arguing.
Thanks.
Yeah.
I have to do this. Sorry. Here we go.
Okay. Alan, you must accept our invitation to come and play with us anytime.
Absolutely, I'll be happy to. It's such an amazing audience. This is great.
It is really, really incredible people here from all across campus. And I'm so grateful to you for reminding us that at the heart of it, design is about play. And it is about inhabiting a space that's even before trust, right? Where you're just at the beach, being with other kids, right? Engaging in the world, in wonder. And I think we don't have enough time for that because we feel such pressure from the outside world, and we've professionalized design almost to the point of like death by optimization. And what you're reminding us is that design is about making with joy. And that's something that I know I will carry with me from your talk. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you again. Thank you. Thank you.